Flipping the Table.
I wanted to take a second to thank our sponsors, Whole Foods Market, the Public Health Institute, and Roots of Change. Without their help, we couldn't present this podcast. Hello, this is Michael Reed Dimmock, and you're listening to Flipping the Table, a podcast featuring honest conversations and brief commentaries about the future of food and farming. I'm inspired by the thousands of farmers, ranchers, entrepreneurs, activists, and policymakers across this nation who are meeting the many challenges related to nutrition, poverty, pollution, and climate. This podcast highlights the people and actions making our planet and communities healthier and more resilient. I hope to inspire listeners to use their food purchases and their votes, our democracy, to flip the table in support of a new and better food system for us all, to be part of the delicious revolution now underway. In recent weeks, I have been encouraged by interactions with and media statements from farmers. More and more, they are speaking out about what is happening to their land and businesses given the climate crisis and trade wars. In my view, farmers and ranchers are greatly underappreciated by most of the American people. As a nation, we have lost touch with the critical role they play in our very existence. Without them, we cannot live. Modern agriculture's productivity is part of the reason the perception of farmers and ranchers' importance has diminished. The concentration of agriculture means less operations and less people working the land. The 2017 agricultural census found there are only a little over 2 million farms or ranches in the nation, and only 3.4 million people running them. Clearly, farmers and ranchers, a bit over 1% of the population, are a small minority within a nation of 327 million people. There are consequences to being part of a minority, even a white minority. Farmers are part of the rural minority, a cultural minority that possesses a legitimate sense of being left behind by the modern technologically and financially oriented economy. I have been encouraged by the news stories of white folks in rural communities who have fought for the protection and safety of farm and food factory workers pursued by ICE. Perhaps there are possibilities for a rural unity across racial lines. Time will tell. Regardless, the extreme concentration of production means that of the 2 million agricultural operations, only 77,000 or 3% are producing over 66% of the food we eat. That seems a perilous concentration to me. But I digress. In today's episode, we're going to hear from a farmer from Southern California. Chris Sayer is a fifth-generation Ventura County farmer. His operation is called Petty Ranch. It is a small and productive farm. He grows citrus, avocados, and figs between the towns of Santa Paula and Saticoy. These small communities are a bit inland from the small city of Ventura, which is 67 miles north on Highway 101 from the center of Los Angeles, the nation's second largest city. Chris serves on the boards of the Ventura County Farm Bureau and the Associates Insectary. The insectary produces beneficial bugs like wasps, mites, and beetles that are used instead of pesticides to combat pests. Back in his younger days, he was a naval aviator protecting the nation by flying submarine chasers up and down the West Coast. I'm a big fan of Chris because he is smart, thoughtful, self-reflective, and not afraid to engage in dialogue and social media communication with folks with whom he may not agree. Chris personifies the type of American that makes people feel safer because he is willing to defend, but in a wise way. We met years ago in a circle of people with different perspectives working to keep Ventura County agriculture alive in the face of urbanization. He is grounded and interested in real facts and this makes him a constructive voice within a team of diverse minds seeking answers. Chris offers his ruminations on farming, sustainability, and local agriculture via his Saticoy Roots weblog. I encourage you to check it out and subscribe because you'll enjoy and benefit from his brief and thoughtful reflections on an array of topics that emerge from his daily experiences. I've learned a lot about avocados, appreciated his awakenings about the changes we make as we age. I was particularly touched by a piece on the legacies of his father and Carlos Ortega, the farm's manager with whom Chris worked for years. I hope that more of us will have a chance to know a farmer or two, like Chris, to befriend them and to seek to understand the challenges they face, the joys they take from their work, and the contributions they make to our daily lives. Thank you for listening to my conversation with Chris Sayer. Welcome, Chris. It's great to be on your farm here in Ventura County, outside the town of Ventura in the Santa Clara Valley, right?
Yeah, glad to have you here, Michael.
Yeah, it's been a while. We, just so the audience knows, we know each other many years, worked together here in Ventura County. My God, 2002, 3, 4, right, we met?
So that's, yeah, beginning of the century.
Beginning of the century, right. Oh my God. So anyway, we came here because I know, I see you as a very thoughtful kind of new generation farmer, meaning you're younger than me, and you're not an oldster. You're when did you start farming, actually? Why don't you say that?
Okay, so I'm part of a family farm. We've been farming here for 5 generations, about 130 years. I came back to the farm when I was 35. Mm-hmm. And what was interesting is in my earlier career, I'd spent a few years in Silicon Valley. Mm-hmm. And when I left Silicon Valley at 35, I was old. Mm-hmm. And 18 years later, as a farmer, I'm still young. So that's kind of a nice time machine effect.
Yeah, that's great. It's just like I was reading about last night, physics thing. Anyway, so I see you as a farmer who's very thoughtful. You've engaged the community. You're a spokesperson for agriculture in Ventura and beyond. So I wanted to have a conversation with you about what it's like to be a farmer in California today, who has a career ahead of them, is looking far into the future. You have siblings, you own this land together, you farm this land together, and you farm lemons and avocados and figs.
Yeah,
primarily. And you've been doing it for 130 years. So when you think about the future, how do you feel about the future? Do you feel it's a bright future? Are you nervous? Where are you on that?
Well, I guess you can't be a farmer without being a long-term optimist, especially if you're a tree farmer. Every time I put a tree in the ground, I'm putting down a 35 or 40-year bet. And so that's a little bit different stakes we're playing for than somebody, say, growing baby radishes or cilantro. You can tell what the weather's going to be for the next 90 to 120 days if you're in row crop and small vegetables. But we have to kind of guess what we're looking at to the middle of the century or beyond. And that's a cloudier crystal ball.
It is. And actually, with all the data coming in on the change in our climate, that would be, to me, seems like a daunting task. So I think it would be interesting to actually, before we get into that, because that's a lot of things I want to talk about, what I'm really interested in is, why did you come back to the farm at 35?
So there are probably a whole bunch of things to unpack there. I had always grown up feeling that was something that I was meant to do in my life. It's something I looked forward to in our earlier adult years. My wife and I always talked about it. And what ended up happening in late 2000, 2001 is that we looked around at the careers we had at that time in Silicon Valley. We realized we weren't that interested in staying on that track, even though it had been good to us. And a few other things fell into place at the same time. My grandmother passed, and the partnership my father and uncle had together, they decided to go their own separate ways. So my father was alone in control of the ranch, and so that created opportunity to come in. My father was also turning 65 at that point, and I realized if I was going to start working with him and learning from him, it was time to get going on that. And as it happened, both of our kids were going to have to change schools the next year anyway. And so we realized suddenly this was the perfect opportunity to do that. Everything was lining up, and
The fates were with you.
yeah. So the timing was right, and when it turned out that we had the opportunity to buy a small farm for ourselves to run in parallel with the family operation, we thought, wow, there's suddenly all sorts of reasons to go, and not that many to stay. So we packed up and came home.
Wow. And when you came, was it a daunting task to learn farming, or did you remember the farming operation from your childhood? Has it been a steep learning curve? And then I also want to get into the changes you've made, because I don't think you're farming exactly like your dad farmed.
No, there have been a few changes. Yeah, it was sort of an interesting transition, because growing up on a farm and always having spoken with my father a lot about sort of the big picture, I felt like I had a good high-level strategic view of farming. But then also growing up as a teenager and working on the farm, I also knew it at the lowest level. And what I realized very quickly over the first couple of years is that I didn't have any of the middle management type experience, what makes things actually work day to day. And so that was a challenge getting up to speed on those skills. And to be honest, I still feel 18 years later that I'm just now getting comfortable with them. There's a lot that goes into running any business in California, especially a farm.
Yeah, farms are really complex. You got markets, regulation, weather, labor. I mean, you got so many variables. It's amazing. So, I'm curious about your decisions to begin to alter the farming operation in different ways. I want to know, what are the things that cause you to think about changes? What are the impacts on you? What are the things that motivate you to think about change?
Well, there are two things. One is, I read a lot of history in school, and that's always had sort of the longer term perspective. And
maybe that's why we get along so well.
Yeah. We've had some great conversations on that. And since we're a family that's been here for 130 years, I can look back just at our own history and recognize that there have been a lot of changes. Ventura County agriculture was once dominated by barley and other grain crops. They used to do hides and tallow for export.
So it means they were doing cattle.
Yeah, they were doing cattle, but not for the beef, just for what we would today consider the byproducts, the leather. And then you've had the sugar beets and the walnuts and the lima beans, and really it occurred to me that the one constant of Ventura County agriculture is change. So I came into the business at a period of time when lemons were just ending a historic run. Lemons were the number one crop in Ventura County, 1948 to 2002.
Wow!
So almost exactly when I got here, and that was primarily what our family did. We were 95% lemons. And so one of the things my father and I had talked a lot about over the years, and talked about even more once I arrived, was, well, what is the future? Is the future still going to be lemons? And even if lemons play a big part in our future, do we want to diversify? Do we want to branch out and hedge our bets a little bit, one way or the other? And the other crop we knew relatively well and that we expected had a future here in Ventura County were avocados. So we've started that shift from being almost entirely lemon to roughly 2/3 lemon, 1/3 avocado, and then we've got a couple of acres of other things we're trying out, just so I can knock 5 or 10 years off that learning curve before I ever have to pull one of those out of the holster and try a new crop.
And figs, we just looked at some beautiful figs out there, beautiful small fig trees.
Yeah, that's been a fun experiment. We have a fig tree back behind the barn here, not 50 feet from where we're sitting right now. That's 90 plus years old.
Is it a mission?
Well, so the reality is nobody knows exactly what it is, because there's nobody left alive in the family that can remember it being planted. As best I can tell, it's probably an archaic strain of Black Mission, because it's very, very similar, but it doesn't actually conform in fruit shape, leaf shape, flavor, color quite right. It's really close. And so the family lore is that my great-grandfather planted that one, and we refer to that tree as Harry's tree in his honor. And about 15 years ago, I started sharing some fruit off that tree with some chef and caterer friends of mine, and they loved it and wanted to know more about figs. And from that, we've grown a couple-acre trial orchard where we're working with about a dozen different varieties, and getting through the steep part of that learning curve to see if figs could be something that might be a future crop for us.
Okay, good. And before we get into the future, I want to actually look at the past, because I want to go back to this idea of Ventura County. I remember when I first came here in 1999, there was a study done on the future of agriculture that the Farm Bureau and the county did. I don't know if you remember that.
Yeah.
And it was what they called an industry sector kind of study, like they were doing it for a lot of different industries. And
Right.
it was a future of agriculture. So I remember I came here for the first time to really look at it. Of course, I'd gone down 101, or in when I was a kid, going to LA, or when I was in college, going to UCLA, and I would see Ventura County and the Oxnard Plain primarily,
Sure.
because that's 101. But I hadn't come into the Santa Clara Valley, and I hadn't seen, or Santa Clara River. It's actually the Santa Paula Valley. Is that what it is?
So it's actually the Santa Clara River Valley.
Yeah, the Santa Clara River Valley.
As opposed to the Santa Clara Valley.
Where I grew up.
Right, which is
Right.
a consistent point of confusion.
Yes, it is. So the Santa Clara River Valley, I remember the first time I really drove along 126 from 5 over, I was like, Jesus Christ, this place is beautiful. It's the sand, kind of like sandy hills with big orchards of avocados, Valencias, lemons, fields of herbs, celery. I mean, it's a really amazing place that most Americans don't know is so productive. Talk about this place.
Yeah, I mean, one of the amazing things to me is that Ventura County is really one of the best kept secrets of American agriculture. We have in terms of crop sales, a $2 billion a year agricultural industry here. That puts us usually, depending on the year, usually between number 9 and number 11 in the nation in terms of our crop value. We are significantly larger than many whole states in terms of our crop value. And yet all of that's done on only about 100,000 irrigated acres of farmland. And there's equally about 100,000 acres of pasture and rangeland. But that's a very, very small footprint to have in one county, which we share with over 800,000 suburban and urban residents and neighbors. And even the vast majority of them have no real idea that we're here, other than to see it as they drive by on one of the freeways. So it's a really unusual place, one of the most important agricultural counties in the country, and yet one that almost nobody, either in the general public or frequently even among policymakers or food systems people, actually even know we're here.
Yeah, I think that's really right. And I'm actually feel blessed that I actually got to work here for so long, for 7 years with you all on the future, how you were going to hold the future together here, and you've done it. I mean, it's pretty amazing what you guys have done. And one of the things that's always impressed me, a lot of leaders in the agricultural world come out of Ventura County. Like, they're really well educated, they're engaged with the public, and maybe it's the urban pressure that you're talking about that causes people to really think. It's not like they're way out in the hinterland where they don't have to worry about it. They're engaged with the public. Do you think that's true?
There's a culture in Ventura County agriculture that I think goes way back, and some of that is that many of the people who were some of the founding families of modern Ventura County agriculture, the people who set up the citrus co-ops and put together, many of these other things which are now, legacies that we live on, had very collaborative mindsets. They were very much, let's roll up our sleeves and figure out how we're going to do this together type of people. Many of the founding farmers in this area were from sort of the New England Congregationalist background. So they have that, barn raiser type ethic where we're all going to get together and do this collectively. And because our area is so small relative to many other agricultural places, we're never that far from town. And the people who were the leading citizens in agriculture historically were very frequently county supervisors or mayors or head of the hospital board or filling these other civic roles. So we've always had this, community straddling the urban-rural line, even when it was the urban was much smaller and the agricultural was much.
Do you think
larger.
that's contributed to the survival of agriculture, despite the fact that you're just 35 miles north of Los Angeles, and there's a lot of pressure?
I think that's part of it. I think we're certainly not immune to friction with our neighbors. Nobody is, but I think that is some of it. But also, I think it's because Ventura County has been so dynamic with so many evolving and changing crops. We've always,
High-value crops.
High-value crops.
I mean, strawberries. We're standing across the field. We're recording this across a field from strawberries that are at the end of the season being picked for jam. You were saying,
right,
and you could smell it. It was a beautiful smell.
Yeah. It's every few years things work out just perfectly. That we're harvesting lemons at the same time that they're picking jamberries across the street, and that can be really wonderful when you have the lemons and strawberries together. So we grow very high value crops here, and Ventura County's always been a comparatively expensive place to farm, and so that has. That comes with its own challenges, definitely. It has also forced people to be very adaptable and very nimble and changing things up. So whereas many agricultural counties across the country may have 90% of their farm gate value in maybe only 3 crops. Right. Ventura County has 30 plus crops that are in the $1 million plus threshold, and some of them are just monsters.
I was going to say hundreds of millions.
Yeah, strawberries are I don't think has been under 600 million in 5 or 6 years. Lemons are in the hundreds, 150 to 190. Avocados are usually 100 plus. Celery, raspberries,
strawberries. You said strawberries.
Yeah, strawberries are first. Right. But raspberries were something that didn't even exist here 20 years ago when you first arrived, and now they're consistently one of our top 5 crops at $100 to $150 million a year in crop sales.
That's amazing. You can hear the chicken in the background. I saw some chickens when we walked in.
We do have a rooster.
Are those your mom's?
Yeah, those are my mom's
for
mom's
eggs.
chickens. Yeah,
great, good.
Those are home chickens, not commercial.
Right. So now I want to switch and start talking about the future. One thing that just happened, was it yesterday, the day before, the state of California outlawed chlorpyrifos.
Yes.
Which is heavily used in agriculture, not like it used to be, much less every year. It's been less and less in the last few years. But it's a pretty toxic organophosphate chemical that's been used in agriculture for a long time. From your perspective, because you're not organic, you're close to organic. You farm what I would call an biologically integrated system. You're doing tons of soil work, building your soil. We saw it. There'll be photos up when people see this of what you're doing with your soils. I mean, you have incredible 4%, 5%, 6% organic matter, which is huge because of the work you're doing with your soils.
We're proud of that. We've worked hard to get that number up there.
Yeah, and that helps you capture water because you're in a light rain area compared to other agricultural regions. Yeah.
Yeah, the changes in our soil organic matter compared to the natural state for these soils where we are means that our 50 acres here can absorb about 2.5 million gallons of extra rainwater every winter. Wow. So that's all water that we're holding on the farm for the benefit of our crops, and also, just as importantly, on the other side of the ledger, that's all water that's not carrying sediment or nutrients or other things off the farm into waterways, where it stops becoming a benefit and starts becoming a problem. Right. So we've tried really hard to do that. I subscribe to sort of the original 1960s view of organic farming, and that organic farming is about what you do as far as feeding the soil and growing the soil. But I'm not organic cannot call myself organic because, yeah, we will still use, a conventional material when that appears to be the right
only
choice for a
option.
specific problem. Yeah.
Right. So I was going to say that's why I brought up chlorpyrifos, because I was wondering, you must know growers that use chlorpyrifos. You might have used it in your career. What do you think the reaction of agriculture is going to be around that decision from the Newsom administration?
I know within Western growers and some of the other statewide organizations, there's definitely been a pushback on it. Here locally, chlorpyrifos use has really been declining very steadily for a good probably 15 years or so. Because even before they put a ban into effect, it increasingly has become more heavily scrutinized, and specifically a lot more regulation with respect to buffer zones around anything that isn't agricultural. So it has dropped very, very steadily. I was talking to somebody who's an operator of a spray company, and I think he said 12 years ago or something they had applied 15,000 pounds, and in 2017 they applied 100 pounds, and they still have 2 or 3 pounds in inventory, which they haven't had to use.
Right.
And
so that's
definitely
a tribute to agriculture here, in my mind. It means they're finding other ways. They don't need it.
Yeah, there are other approaches. Other approaches, can come with their own challenges. It's not always easy to switch gears, but farmers are adaptable. One thing that you've heard over and over the years is something will come up and people say, oh, well, but if we do this will be the death of agriculture. Well, the death of agriculture has been predicted many, many times, and farmers are creative and persistent, and we find ways to, muddle through. But the load does get heavier.
Yeah, let's get this into the next topic,
sure,
which is climate change. You live in the southern part of the state. This is the southwest. Really, we're in the southwest, and the southwest is dry and warm. And the predictions are that there's going to be 35% less rain by the middle of the century, less water in the state, 35% less water in the state. That's one of the primary projections that I've seen. We know temperatures are rising. So talk to me about how you think about that challenge. And I want to bring in the term resilience. Do you think about the word resilience? Is resilience a term or an idea that you consider as a farmer managing a farm? Let's start with that.
I think about that term a lot. I actually prefer to focus on that term rather than a word like sustainable, which in my view is something you can really only properly judge in hindsight. We have all sorts of ideas about what's good policy, and the reality is, everything that today we look at and say, "Wow, that was a bad policy," we thought was good policy once upon a time. Regenerative. I feel like that is a term that gets used in a lot of different ways and somewhat non-specifically. But resilient is actually a term I like. That's an important term to me as a farmer. You will have setbacks. You will have bad crop years. You will have bad markets. You will have pests. You'll have too much rain. You'll have not enough rain. And it's that ability to bounce back from it that determines whether you're able to keep going. So that's been very much on my mind with what we've done, and all the work we've done towards soil building is very much part of that. All the work we're doing is trapping some carbon in our soil. Is our 50 acres going to make a difference in global climate change? Absolutely not. Absolutely immeasurable. But having that carbon in our soil, where we can absorb water, where we can have better soil structure, we can allow our trees to develop a healthier, deeper root structure. That all adds to resilience. And so, whatever people want to argue about carbon in the air, carbon in the soil is a great thing. And so we're very happy to see that. And that's really one of our primary tools, I believe, to be able to adapt to what's coming down the road. Because we honestly, we don't really know what it's going to be like. It will be some level of bad.
Right. Yeah.
But,
It will be certainly new, so it'll feel bad.
Yeah. I mean,
because we don't like change as humans, right?
well, when people talk about, well, we're looking at an average change of, a couple degrees Fahrenheit or centigrade. The average temperatures for us are never what causes the problem. A change in average temperature is not going to bother my trees one bit. Now, what will bother them is a day at 113, like we had last summer. It'll be, one night under 28. That makes a difference. And, it's hard enough with the models to talk about what average temperatures are.
But the extremes.
But knowing the outliers, what's going to happen on one specific night?
Right.
Are we going to see a night below 28 once every 10 years? We can live with that. Once every 8 years, that's going to be tough. If it's every year, we're definitely out of the avocado business. So yeah, we have a lot of unknowns. Some people do think it's odd that we're actually increasing our avocado acreage here, but we are in an area where the microclimate is very, very favorable for avocados. We can see some change, which will definitely take us closer to the edge, but I think we'll still be in that window.
And do you think you're unusual? Do you think you're an unusual farmer? Or I'm not talking about farmers that are, let's say, of your father's generation before he passed, or that generation, older farmers that we know. But your generation farmers, how many of them would you say that you're in the norm, or are you atypical? Where do you feel you stand in that spectrum?
I don't feel like I'm actually that unusual. I think I might be more ready to talk to people off farm about it. But just about everybody I can think of is always worried about, well, what's coming next. There's sort of a stereotype of people have of farmers that we're going to keep doing the same thing in the same way over and over again, and we won't change and we won't back down regardless of what the evidence is. And that hasn't been my experience. The farmers I know are always keeping a weather eye. They're always wondering, okay, what's coming in terms of markets? What's coming in terms of pests? What's coming in terms of plant disease or weather, regulation, labor? All of these, many of these things are eternal problems in agriculture. Pests, labor, and water have been issues in California agriculture, since the mission days, and I see no sign that that's going to let up anytime soon. Right. So we're very used to the idea that change is something that is inevitable.
And so you're on the board of the Ventura County Farm Bureau. Farm Bureau is the largest, probably the organization that represents the largest spectrum of agriculture in the state of California and in the nation, probably. And then there's also Western Growers, there's a large association that represents specialty crop growers like yourself. You're a specialty crop grower. That's the terminology that they use when talking about food systems, right? And the government uses. So when you are in board meetings, does the term resilience come up?
I have heard it used. I mean, very often, in the context of the Farm Bureau's board, we are working, we have an organization to run and other things like that. So we're not always focused on just,
the issues,
sort of the broader scopes, but it can never be very far from our mind. We know everybody in that room knows the difficulties of staying in business. Many of the board members are parts of multi-generational farming families like I am. And some are people who are comparatively new to Ventura County and usually in different crops that may not have been as traditional here. And so I think there's that nice balance and it keeps us aware of that changing nature.
So I'm just curious about a couple of things I want to get to. One is cannabis. I think I read something about Ventura and cannabis recently. Like there's a little struggle going on around the future of cannabis production here. Is that true? And is the Farm Bureau in on that? And what's your view of cannabis production?
So our local farm bureau has really been sort of staying on the sidelines to that. So I can't give an
position,
organizational
right.
position. Ventura County, as a county, has generally been somewhat skeptical and concerned with other things which may enter in. Carpinteria, which is in Santa Barbara County, but just pretty much over the county line and is sort of part of our ecosystem, has embraced it much more readily. Because they had a large flower growing industry, so they had the greenhouse infrastructure that sort of lended itself to easy adaptation, and it definitely brings with it issues. Personally, I am not anti-cannabis, either industrial or recreational. I'm something of a skeptic, not necessarily about the industry at large. I think it will become a very big industry, but I'm personally skeptical that there are necessarily that many opportunities for a lot of smaller growers or operations to get in, because there's some very large money and some very sophisticated players who are already staking out ground. And I'm somewhat skeptical that, particularly when you look at the industrial stuff, anything which is being grown for processing will likely find a home in Ventura County, just because we're a very high cost to produce area. And generally, I think that's probably only going to work if you're somebody who has the capital and the infrastructure to be really fully vertically integrated, and that would be so
Which
much
means field to finished product that's been processed.
Yeah. So you're growing it, you're processing it into the raw material. You're maybe going the next step to turn it into the oil or the end product, and that's going to be an expensive proposition. And for a crop which can be grown almost anywhere, my hunch is that the bigger, smarter money is going to focus in other areas. So
where greenhouses are.
Yeah, where
lots of
greenhouses are.
Right.
I mean, that's particularly because of sensitivity people have in the regulations to any type of contamination at all, even not just conventional materials, but even organic. I think there's a real pressure for them to go to a controlled climate type grow environment, and I'm a little skeptical that's going to be a major opportunity for Ventura County.
You're probably right.
But that's just my read of the tea leaves.
That's interesting. So I ask because it kind of comes up everywhere now where we go and talk to people, is that because of the growth of cannabis industry and people's thoughts about it. There was some recent articles I just saw actually last night about how difficult it is. Like, the projections on the revenue that would be flowing are way off. There's just not revenue flowing because it's expensive to get in, so people are not going into the legal market. They're still staying in the black market or the gray market or whatever, So there's a lot to be done there, it seems to me, in that area. Let's move on.
Sure.
I'm interested in your kind of feelings about the next generation of farmers. I know, the average age of a farmer is getting up there. It's around 60 now, I think, here in Ventura and in California generally. Do you feel that the flow of farmers coming in is robust, and are you confident that there'll be a next generation of farmers here in this county?
I am confident that there will be something here. Again, we've always found the way to muddle through. That's something that farmers are great at. I think I'm probably going to be one of the last folks on sort of the more classic, traditional farmer track in this area, in the sense that I farm and live on the same piece of property that I own. I think farm management, farm ownership are likely to diverge. They're not. There's no reason that must always be the same. And as it becomes more expensive to own the land, and as it requires more specialization and professionalism to actually manage farming effectively, I think you're going to see a shift away from one farmer who lives on his land and he's the jack of all trades and does everything, towards a situation where you may have somebody, who owns the land and is maybe perhaps sort of more of a gentleman farmer, but they may be, leasing that ground to some younger farmers who will actually come in and do the farming, or they may have a hired farm manager who is working on, the farm, maybe under their general direction, but perhaps using more expertise from specialists in given areas.
That makes a lot of sense to me. And I mean, I even see that actually already existing, like down the Monterey and in the Pajaro Valley, where they grow tons of strawberries. A lot of that land is not owned by the farmers. It is owned by people in San Francisco. It's owned by people in LA who lease the ground to farmers who are farming the ground.
Right.
And I do. And does that a lot of that exist? Right? Is that strawberry field owned by the people that across the way from you?
So in the case of our neighbors, yes, they own and operate that field, but the owners don't necessarily live
on the ground
on that ground.
Right.
So that bundle of all of those things together is already somewhat frayed. Many of the best farmers I know don't live on their farm. They live in the suburbs. And so that is definitely a change which is taking place.
I think that's true. I mean, the whole image of the family farm, I think, is an image in most cases. You know what I'm saying?
It has never been as universal and as set in stone as people would think. It's long been the case that farms are often being supported by an off-farm income. And while usually people think of that in terms of doing farming and another career simultaneously, it can be broken, over the course of a lifespan. My experience after college, I served in the Navy. I worked in Silicon Valley for a little while, and then I came back to farming.
Right.
So my earlier work experience helped support the farming, even though they were sequential rather than in tandem. Right. And my father had done the same thing, working in the aerospace boom in the '60s before coming back to farming. Both of us essentially returned to farming in our 30s because we've never been a large enough operation to really fully support multiple generations at once. So you went off and you did something else, and then you came back. Only of the 5 generations we've been here. Only my great grandfather was the only one who actually was a farmer
his whole life,
and only a farmer his whole career.
Interesting, yeah.
And he even actually went to the Alaska gold rush for a few years after high school. It didn't return home with anything. But,
didn't declare Yukon or whatever.
It didn't make his fortune that allowed him to stay in farming. But fortunately for him, he was able to come back for what really was the golden age of lemons and oranges in the 30s and 40s. So it was his good fortune that he did not have to.
And are you generally bullish on the future of California agriculture? I mean, well, actually, let me reframe this. So, one of the things that farmers complain a lot about in this state is the level of regulation. California has more regulation than any other state in the union around agriculture. We also have the highest value crops. We also have the largest market. I mean, there are a lot of things that come with that. The regulations are frowned upon because they're a hassle, and I see it. It is a hassle. It's a reality. It's a hassle. At the same time, it's part of what makes the quality of California agriculture so appealing to many markets is that we have really good regulation. So people worry less about labor, they worry less about pesticides, they worry less about things like that, and they know that there's this big march towards dealing with climate change here. So my question to you is, do you think the government in California is an ally to farmers, or do you think it's really a pain in the ass?
That depends a little bit on the day. Definitely, there are days where they're a pain in the ass. I will add that some of the pressures in agriculture, even though they often get lumped under the government and regulation rubric, are actually things that come from the private sector. A lot of the stuff that we find ourselves needing to do these days are for food safety audits, and that's largely driven by the private sector. The county ag commissioner can want you to do this or want you to do that, and they have certain powers to make you comply. But if you want to be able to sell your product through Costco, you absolutely have to be able to comply with certain food safety regs, and so that it's not just a governmental thing. It is private sector as well, and
the retailers,
and that is global and national. And for a long time, I shared that resentment and
towards government.
And don't get me wrong, on certain days there are. I still do. But I had an interesting conversation with someone about a year ago or so who actually does food safety compliance all over the country. And she made a brilliant point, I thought. She said, you guys in California don't know how much better you are, because between the regulation and just the cost and the competitive pressure just to stay in business, she says, you guys are forced to a level of professionalism and compliance. She says it's really unique. And she says it's a any sort of Darwinian environment where pressure makes you stronger. Nobody says that's going to be pleasant. But she thought, it's that pressure that actually makes you guys so good.
Wow.
And I thought that was a really interesting perspective, because I'll be the first to admit, I have a very parochial worldview. I grew up in Ventura County. I farm in Ventura County. I do not believe I will ever be farming anywhere else. I cannot tell you anything intelligent about, dairy or soybeans. But, the lemon avocado business and this part of California, I feel like I know. And so to have that perspective of somebody who's worked in the South, who's worked in the Midwest, who's worked in New England and California, both on the coast and Central Valley, which are also very different things. That was a really fascinating perspective to me.
Actually, it's a beautiful thing to hear, because to me it's I'm glad to hear it, because I have believed that about agriculture. I mean, I'm not a farmer, so I don't feel the pressure that you feel about regs. But I do see the advantages that come with that. And so I think that's actually a really great way to end. We've spent 45 minutes here talking.
Went quickly.
Yeah, it went quickly. But it was really, really, as always, I've enjoyed speaking with you, Chris. You're a very articulate, very thoughtful man with a great spirit and a great future. And you really add a lot to your community in agriculture. I know all the good work that you've done through the years with the Hanson Trust, with the Ag Futures Alliance, with the Farm Bureau, and with your educational program here. One thing we didn't mention is you have a school program where kids come out, all 2,000 kids during the year?
We see about 2,000 kids a year, but I should say that's not me. We're simply the host, and occasionally I get roped into being the MC. But
it's on your property.
But that's a great nonprofit here in Ventura called CAG, and they run both that program and the Ventura County Farm Day program. So they are a tremendous ambassador for agriculture in our community.
Great.
I've got to make that plug there.
No, absolutely.
I'm big fans
I'm glad you did. Yeah, it's beautiful. And I'm sorry we didn't get to it sooner, because we went and walked through it, and it's really neat. There'll be pictures on the website of your program and in our social media, so people can see the signs and the educational work you do for kids, so they can learn about soil and beneficial insects and water use and the amount of water in the land. So it's well done. So thanks very much for your time. Really appreciated it.
Absolutely. Glad you were in the neighborhood.
You have been listening to Flipping the Table, a podcast about food, farming, and the future. Flipping the Table is hosted by me, Michael Reed Dimmock, and produced by Patrick Sexton. Our production colleague is Doris Meyer. Our sponsors include Roots of Change and the Public Health Institute. If you have questions, comments, suggestions, or would like to sponsor Flipping the Table, please email us at comments@fthetable.com. That's comments@fthetable.com. Thank you for listening. We've been focusing on great female leaders who are making important changes in the food system. Anna LaPay, the author and activist and now philanthropist, Navina Khanna, who's trying to organize the food movement nationally through the Heal Food Alliance, and Nicolette Hahn-Nyman, who has been writing incredible books and doing great advocacy around the importance of livestock in the food system. And finally, Leah Penniman, who is an author who's written a book called Farming While Black and is the co-founder of Soulfire Farm in upstate New York. Amazing interview about her life and work. These are powerful women shaping our food, and I hope you'll listen. Thanks.